Hello everybody, good evening, and a very warm welcome to our special program this evening, Dying to See the Light. And a very warm welcome to everyone who's joined us online. We very much feel your presence with us in the room. We are, of course, here at Global Cooperation House, which is the international coordinating office of the Brahma Kumaris. Anybody here for the first time at a program? Okay, particularly welcome to you. It's always nice to see new faces. So let me just tell you a little bit about the Brahma Kumaris for those of you who are new. Over 80 years, it's a spiritual organization. In fact, it's the largest spiritual organization in the world for men and women that is led by women, particular speciality there. And the subject taught is Raja Yoga meditation, which is a form of personal self-development, tools for getting by in everyday life and experiencing some of the things that we're going to be talking about tonight. So we have, I think it's about 9,000 centres in over 120 countries right around the world, in many, many different languages. So it really is spreading light in all corners. So for those of you that are joining us in the house this evening, I've just got a few housekeeping rules for you. If you have your mobile phone, please make sure it's either switched off or put onto silent mode or even flight mode. That would be much appreciated, just not to break the silence that we're going to be creating. If you need the bathroom or any water, then that's just at the back of the auditorium on the right as you're leaving. You can find toilets there. We're not expecting a fire drill, and so in case of the fire alarm sounding, you will be required to immediately evacuate the building, and the ushers will guide you towards the nearest emergency exits. And finally, for those of you in the room, there is some filming of tonight's event, which will possibly just catch the back of your heads. If you'd really rather not have the back of your head in the frame, then maybe you could just sit a little bit towards the back. And I think those are the announcements. So tonight really is a special evening, as I said. We're going to be in the company of two extraordinary people, seekers of truth, people who have, for their own different reasons, tried to live their life as much as possible in the experience of silence. And our guest speaker, the thing that propelled her into this quest, this search for truth, for meaning, for silence in her life, was not just one, not just two, but 3 near-death experiences. Is there anyone in the room that would say that they have had a near-death experience? Whoa, really? That's quite a few. Isn't that interesting? And of course, the other phenomenon, out-of-body experience. Some people get a feeling of floating above their body, which is allied to a near-death experience, but different. And in what way does that differ from a regular meditation experience? We're going to be talking about that this evening as well. But we thought it might just be nice, before I introduce you to our guest speakers, to just take 2 minutes for you to turn to someone that is near to where you're sitting and just share with them what it was about tonight's topic that brought you here this evening. What was it that you found interesting? Is there an experience that you've had in your life, or is there a question that you're journeying with that you think tonight's event may shed some light on? No pun intended. So maybe just for 2 minutes, if you could just turn to your neighbour and just share what it is about tonight's topic that you find interesting. Okay. I always hate interrupting what sound like really interesting conversations. But if you do feel that was unfinished conversation, you can always finish it off later on in the evening. And if you're joining us online, I hope you were able to find someone to talk to, even if it was just the cat or the dog. You never know. They might have found what you had to say quite interesting. So let me introduce you to our two, I'm going to call them angels. They're both real angels, angels of light. They both carry so much light with them. Our first guest really needs no introduction from me. I'm sure you all know her already. Sister Jayanti is the director for the Brahma Kumaris for both Europe and the Middle East. She's also now the additional administrative head of the Brahma Kumaris, which takes her over to India quite a bit these days. So we're very happy that she's here, and especially here on this day. She's been journeying with her practice of Raja Yoga meditation for over 50 years. She's a child from both India and the UK, so she carries a lovely way of explaining some of the deep mysteries of life in a way that our Western minds and intellects can understand. She's also the representative to the United Nations in Geneva, and of course the Brahma Kumaris has had an affiliation with the United Nations since 1980. So she's a speaker at events right around the world. She's written, I think it's 12 books now, done some beautiful meditation commentaries, so you'll be able to catch up on those later this evening. So real special treat for you this evening to have Sister Jayanti with us. And of course we have Ingrid Honkala, Dr. Ingrid Honkala. Now, you would think someone who drowned or nearly drowned in a tanker of water would never want to go near water for the rest of their life. You could understand that. But actually, Ingrid went from that experience to being quite drawn to the ocean, to the sea, and she became a marine biologist. She graduated in marine biology. She then went on and did a PhD in marine sciences in biological oceanography. When she entered the world of work, she was a research assistant for NASA, which of course is the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. She was associate researcher for the Environmental Ministry of her native Colombia, along with UNESCO. She was then the chief of marine biology for the Colombian Navy. And her work took her to some field work in war zones where she witnessed some really horrendous scenes. The only good thing that happened is that it was there that she met her husband in the middle of a war zone, and she got married and they had their son David. So we're talking here about someone who's completely immersed in the sciences, to the extent that Ingrid is actually going back for more academic work. She's doing a second PhD in quantum physics. That's coming up next for her. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you'll agree it's going to be a fascinating evening. Please put your hands together for Ingrid Honkala and Sister Jayanti. Please join me. Thank you, Manu. It really does feel like we've got the marriage of science and spirituality on the stage here. I'm fascinated to see where this conversation is going to go. But Ingrid, you've been in a way, doing a little tour of all the Brahma Kumaris centres. You've been in Spain giving talks, and then you've been in the south of England. You've just come from the Oxford Retreat Centre. You must be feeling like you're almost at home here now.
Oh, completely. It's been like everywhere I go, like, oh, I'm meeting family. I'm meeting family. And it's just having sisters and brothers everywhere I go. So I cannot ask for more.
And what's lovely for us is that, you know, we're many of us here students of Raja Yoga meditation, and we've learnt the theory of the anatomy of the soul, and we've learnt about the region of light that is beyond this physical world. And then in our practice of meditation, we try and experience it. But of course, you started with a very sudden experience of the world beyond the physical. I wonder, Sister Jayanti, if that is a way for some people, that they have a profound experience and that is what leads them to find out more about that experience.
Om Shanti, a greeting of peace to Ingrid and Philippa and all of you. Yes, definitely, I found that somebody who many of you know, Neville, for example, a journalist, very hardcore scientist. He first had amazing experiences in meditation, and then he took a long time to piece together what it is that was happening and make sense of it. And so yes, I have met several people, some of you have also met them, I'm sure you are them, who go through an experience first. And his explanation of that for himself is that if he had been told the logic and the reason about soul and all these things, maybe he wouldn't have accepted it. And so he had to be pulled out of his skin and given a very special experience. And that made him then explore the ideas behind that.
I know something that Neville talks about, because he researches in this field, is the new thinking on the location of consciousness. Because we're going to be talking a lot about the soul and the sort of states of awareness that we can reach. And yet science teaches us that, you know, the brain is where it all happens. But spirituality says, no, the brain is part of the physical body, and what we're experiencing is non-physical. Where do you think we stand in terms of this new understanding of the location of consciousness?
My own experience through meditation, not through out-of-body experiences, but meditation has taught me that the location of consciousness is right here. And this is the place that's also known as the third eye. People have spoken about the third eye of wisdom or the third eye of insight. And so consciousness is that third eye. It's not a separate thing, but that's consciousness, and that's the location of the Atma, the soul. And it's just in front of the brain. And so brain is definitely distinct and separate, and that's part of the physical anatomy. I've seen how sometimes there have been situations where people don't have physical capacity to move or anything. Their brain function isn't actually happening. They're alive, but the brain function isn't happening. I've met a couple of situations like this. But what happens then is that when you go to see them, there's still eye contact, there's still a connection that's being made. And most of the time they're not in any consciousness, but at times then they respond to a vibration, they respond to the sound of someone's voice. And so definitely there's something apart from the brain that's functioning, and that is consciousness.
Mm. So Ingrid, tell us a little bit about your experience of light. We'll talk in a moment about the actual near-death experience, but describe for us, because we have our own experiences through meditation, but it would be lovely to hear what you experienced of the light and how it made you feel, because you have said that in many ways the experience you had of the light felt more real to you than the reality that we have when we're in our physical dimension.
Yes, and I even bridge the word reality, and I say it felt truth. And it was the sense of complete connection. When I even talk about it, it's like I lack words, because it's so profound, so in depth. It was, I call it like a breath. It's like you just go into it, and it's like being embraced. It's like being absolutely loved. It's like being adored. And talking with Sister Jayanti, when she said, it's like when you go to the mother, the father, and they embrace you and you lose yourself in those arms. And that's when now I even got more clarity about that sense of nothingness. Because it was the sense that when you put it so beautifully, when the baby loses himself in the hands or the arms of the father, the mother, and you just become one. That is the experience I have had, is completely being merged, adored, loved, lost there. And is that sense of, and I received this later in many times as just a teaching, let yourself rest calmly in the hands of the divine guidance. It was like, oh yes, I can do that. Although sometimes we resist and sufferings come, but when we allow that, is that profound connection. And as you know that we are all adored, and that everything, when you're in the arms of the mother, the father, you know that everything is all right.
Can you explain what you mean by the door? What is the door?
The door, when I mention the door, I always mention that the door never closed. Yes, because I always, when I had my first near-death experience, and I kept having after that out-of-body experiences and experiences that kept me connected, I always say to people, it's like for me the door never closed. It's like for me the door, because people ask me, how can you remember this experience if you were so little? And I say, it's like the doors for me never closed. Until I got the teaching, I received the clarity about it, and the clarity was like, Ingrid, of course the doors never close, because there are no doors. So it's when we understand what we call the kingdom of heaven, God, the light of consciousness, presence, is always here for us, always is and always have been.
So the near-death experience, in a way, it opened up a portal to that dimension, and once it was opened, it never closed. We're going to ask you about your experience in a moment, but Sister Jayanti, people often in meditation have this sense of sort of dissolving into the love of the divine, to the point where they experience nothingness and a sense of no self. What's actually happening in those moments?
There are different stages in meditation. And at first I'm trying to meditate, trying to focus my thoughts. Another stage where I'm very focused and concentrated. Another stage where I'm experiencing the qualities of the divine. And when that stage begins and I continue to stay in that awareness, there's a stage in which it's like I've lost the awareness of being separate from the divine, but I'm merged into that ocean of light, of love, of peace, and there's no thought. At that moment there's the golden silence that people have spoken about. Silence is golden. And so the mind is very still, but you're in that experience of God's light and love. There's no separation, but it's a feeling. It's not a physical reality. The divine has an identity which is quite unique and special, and every single soul is again eternal. It can never lose its identity. And so I think when people say that you fade into nothingness, it's the feeling that they're experiencing. But of course then, after some period of time, whether it's a moment or several minutes, it's not much longer than that usually, you come back to the consciousness of this identity, and the soul, if it retains that awareness of having had that experience, and it lives with that experience, the door never closes. And so I can understand and relate it to my own experiences in meditation. And so I think that one can experience the light without the physical death.
And have you ever had a meditation experience that was so beautiful that you didn't want to come back from it?
Definitely, definitely. And my most powerful experiences have been in Mount Abu. And some of you have been there, and I know that when you're there, you say that it was so easy to meditate at 4 o'clock in the morning. It was totally natural. And you come back to London and you say, it's not so easy. So I think that the vibration, the atmosphere there is very unique and powerful. But yes, you can easily have those experiences, and of course you can have it here in London also. But it's easier if the atmosphere is powerful. But here too, yes, especially early in the morning. Through the day there tends to be many other things going on. And even if there isn't noise, there's a different vibration. But early morning is a time when it's much easier just to slip into that consciousness and experience it, where you don't want to leave it.
I know, Ingrid, after your experience, you very much didn't want to come back into your body. Let's tell the story of what happened to you, because you were in the Andes in Colombia, where you were being raised, and your parents were both going out to work, so they hired a nanny to look after you and your 2 sisters at that time. And your nanny was in the house watching or listening to a soap opera, and you and your sister decided to play a game of ball. Only to make it more interesting, you were throwing the ball to each other across a huge water tank where the water was stored for washing the clothes for the family. And your sister threw the ball, and you were sat on the edge of this tank, and you leaned forward to reach the ball and unbalanced, and the next thing you knew, you were in that cold water. Tell us what happened next.
Yes, that was the tremendous sense of that this water was frigid cold. And from there, I had never been in a tank, in a pool. We didn't have a bathtub, so I had never had my head under the water. And now was the realization why I cannot breathe. And I, of course, went into that state of terror. And at that moment is that survival feeling, how can I get out of this tank? And when I am experiencing that state of absolute horror, something incredible happened. I went from that state of terror to one of complete peace. It was peace and serenity and quietness, and it was the sense of, I didn't know what was happening, but it's the sense, I don't need to breathe. I don't need to go anywhere. It was just feeling perfectly well. And then I always like to mention the word contrast, because that is what brings me to remember the experience. And first, of course, the trauma that drowning creates, but throughout the experience, things happened, like this tank was very dark. The last thing I saw with my eyes open was the darkness of the space. And it came, the moment I entered into that serenity, the light. And it was that sense, oh, now there is light. And then it came the next contrast. I live in a really noisy house, and like sisters, dogs, birds, and the last thing I heard was my heart also beating very loud in my chest. And the moment I entered into that peace, silence. The most peaceful and incredible silence, to the point that I call it the silence behind the silence. And even after the experience, I craved this silence for the rest of my life. And I wanted to find this silence. But now I am in the light, the silence, and I started to see bubbles. And these bubbles were shining with light. And it was like, whoa, this is fun. And then I started to chase the bubbles. And that was when I turned and I saw my body in the water. And I had the absolute clear realization, oh, that's my body. And at that moment, it comes the other contrast, and is that I was born as a very sick child. And I always say, in my case, because we will ask, oh, why a child can be born this sick? But in my case, if I would have been born like all healthy and all good, and this happens, then maybe I don't remember because still good. But for almost 3 years, I didn't even know how it was to feel well. And now I am in the state of complete well-being. So the moment I look at the body, I said, oh no, I'm not going back there. And I left the body behind. And the moment I left the body behind, I just entered a state of bliss and peace. And I said that it was like going back to the womb, where you don't have to do anything, you just being carried. And when I am in this state of being, suddenly I appear in the nanny's room, and I'm looking at her from above, like floating. And I'm like, whoa, that's Maria? And Maria was listening to the soap operas, completely unaware. And from there, in just a flash, I appeared in my mom's path. She didn't have a car. She was close to her bus stop. And I just appeared above her. And I said, again, now like, oh, that's Mom? And the incredible thing about this part of the experience is the one, validate the experience. And two, I think is the most amazing thing, like, I have to always add that my mom had gotten a new job. And imagine us, is the idea like, I have to go to my new job. No, the moment I appeared above her and I said, oh, that's Mom, she stopped. She did not even hesitate. And what happened is, I have to say that my mom was a very intuitive person, but also that she listened to that intuition. And at that moment, my mom turned around and started to run. And I'm looking at her from above, and I'm like, oh, I wonder why she's running. But she knew something was happening at home with one of her children. And the moment I'm just looking at her, in the horizon, I see a dog. And I love animals. And it was like, the moment I have the desire to be with the dog, I am with the dog. And I'm like, whoa. And then I see a park. And the moment I feel the desire to be in the park, I am in the park. So I started to play this game of going places. And I was having so much fun. And so it was like time and space as we know it just vanished. And when I'm having fun playing this game, in another blink is when I appear in a realm that was made of pure, bright, intense, shiny light. And this was the first time in my almost 3 years of life that I felt, oh, I am home. I am home. And although I had seen my body in the water, up to this point I didn't have the realization that that was not my body. And then now I'm like, wow, I am not that. And it was that sense that I am not that, and I realized myself as a being of light. And again, that sense of home was that sense of embrace, and you just imagine being home, that you feel comfortable and good, and then I was just feeling the sense of resting and dissolving. And then at that point is when I entered in that, I was still first having the sense of self. But then is when I talk about this sense of nothingness. It's like the sense of complete connection, complete embrace, complete. And then I put the example of the stadium. When I said about the sense of nothingness, I said, imagine that there's a huge stadium. And everything you thought about you, or what you knew about you, was a little tiny box in the middle of the stadium, and you thought you were that. And suddenly the box opens up, and you realize, oh, it's nothing, because it's nothing you thought you were, but wholeness, like sense of totality. And then, while I'm in my state of bliss, I think that this is the most difficult state of being to explain. The only words I can say is a state of pure presence and absolute consciousness. And that is state of bliss. And then, as I am having this moment of bliss, my mom finally get home. And this is the other incredible thing. She knew exactly where to go. And she directed herself to the back of the house. And there next to the tank was my oldest sister. And she said, Mom, Ingrid is here and I cannot get her. She jumped in the tank. She pulled me out. My mom said that I was like a raggedy doll, no pulse, no breathing, blue nails, blue lips. And something incredible also happened with this thing we call synchronicities. My mom worked with children, and she had been trained to do CPR for children. So she started to do whatever she knew with me. But I was so disconnected from this body, from this reality, that I didn't feel absolutely anything she was doing. And it was, the only thing that happened is that suddenly I felt that I had jumped from the tallest building in the world. And it was the sense that I was being pulled back, that I was being vacuumed back, and there's nothing I could do. But for me it was the sense of like, no! And then I knew I was back in the body when the sense of that expansive state of being now, whoop, back in the little box, and it was the sense of losing that freedom and the sense of, I don't want to be here. I was very angry, the coldness, the sense of, I don't have that same well-being, and I was really angry. It was like, and I said to people, of course, imagine that you bring your child to an amusement park, and you're having all the fun in the world, and suddenly they tell you, we have to go. Oh, you're going to throw a fit. So that's what happened.
I wonder, Sister Jayanti, if you can unpack this story for us a little, and what your impressions are of hearing this, because in many ways Ingrid could be describing a meditation experience. This sense that I'm not the body, this sense of being in this region of light that feels like home, this expansive awareness. How do you respond to this story?
Exactly in the way that you've described it, because what this story is validating is the fact that the body is separate from the soul, and so you were able to see the body there, and whether you knew it was your body or not, but you could see that the body was there and you were separate. And then when you felt that sense of lightness and freedom and you didn't want to go back into that body, I understand that totally, in that experience of being in that space which is our home, a world of light. Then once you're there, then you feel that this is my home, this is where I belong, this is where there's freedom, and I don't necessarily want to come back into the body. And so yes, I can relate to all of that with the meditation experience, but you're lucky that you had that experience and the door never closed, and so you've been able to explore things further and further.
And what specifically about this experience of the silence that for Ingrid was so powerful? Why do we find the experience of silence so sweet?
When I'm thinking, I'm working. I'm actually making myself work. And when I'm thinking too much, I'm working overtime, which is why we get stressed. And when I'm in a space where there's silence, and the influence of that silence is making me also go beyond thoughts and just stay in the experience, then that's the time when it's my natural state of being. I don't have to work, I don't have to think, I'm just in that experience. And so this is why even today, even though our lives are so busy and we get caught up with so many different things, we crave for that moment of silence when the soul can just be completely free and just stay in peace. And this is why in India they have another lovely expression, Swadharam Shanti. My original religion, my original state of being is peace, is silence. Shanti can also be translated as silence. And so in that state of silence, I'm back in my own natural state of being. It's like, when you've been putting on different costumes and then you finish with that and you can just be in your own natural costume, in something that you're comfortable. You feel free, you feel relaxed. And so caught up in the whole situation of emotions and feelings and actions and reactions here in the physical dimension, we still want to experience peace. And we think we can experience it by going to the beach or going to the mountains, but it doesn't always happen. In fact, we come back sometimes more exhausted and less peaceful than when we'd gone away on holiday. But the desire is there because the experience is there within the soul, that there is that opportunity when the soul is silent, and that's in its natural state of being.
I'm interested in how this experience played out in Ingrid's life in terms of how it changed her as a person. And I wonder what you feel is the change that happens to people once they start to meditate, because we talk about meditation being a tool for changing the self, for self-transformation. And very often people's lives do change when they start to meditate. Things that were important before don't seem so important. What have you observed in your 55 years of observing people on this journey happens to them? And what is it specifically that makes them want to change?
Let me explain two different situations. One is my own personal experience. I've been studying these teachings. I've been exposed to the Brahma Kumaris since I was little, but I actually started studying these teachings in 1968, in April. And in June, I found myself in front of the founder, Brahma Baba, and I told him I wanted to surrender, and he said he knew it already. He had been able to understand that 3 years earlier. And he said, okay, come this evening after the class. And so a group of us were there in that little courtyard in front of Baba's room. We called him Baba, Father. And he was giving what we call drishti, open eyes meditation, and the awareness, the remembrance of God. And I might have been the fourth or fifth, and he gave me drishti. And he beckoned me to come, and he was giving to me a bunch of jasmine flowers, very fragrant, the month of June, and it's hot and They have a very amazing fragrance. And it was as if something was pulling the soul away from here into that space of silence and light. And it wasn't just the silence of the space, it was the experience of a connection with the divine, a being of light who was able to surround me with love and just merge me in that experience. And I don't know how long it was, but some minutes maybe, whatever. But it was as if the drishti, the voltage was reduced, and it was as if I left that space and came back again here, and I became aware of the other people around me. And Baba asked the question, do you understand what is happening? And it wasn't so much to me, but to the others who were there. And Dadi Janki was there, and she nodded her head. She understood completely what had happened. But that experience of being in a different dimension and then coming back here after having that encounter with the divine made me realize that this is the life I want to lead, and I'm going to be doing this whatever may come. And there were challenges, but that experience carried me through many challenges. And so that's a very dramatic way in which it happened, and I haven't changed my mind since. But on the other side, I see people who understand the teachings, start meditating, and sometimes it's happened that again, through the vision, the drishti of a powerful yogi, they're given that experience, but sometimes it can happen without that. And they also, after such an experience, feel that their life needs to have purpose. It needs to have a deeper meaning than just simply existence or survival. So it's not enough just to say, I'm going to get up in the morning, I'm going to go to work, I'm going to work for my living, I'm going to come back and watch television and go to sleep. There's a higher purpose. And they become aware of that. And they continue to be with their families, they continue to have their jobs, but now it's with a very elevated consciousness. And through their own experience of a different dimension, they're able to share an experience with those around them, in which others also can see that the material things of the world aren't a distraction for these people. They are surrounded by everything, but those material things are not a distraction, but rather they are now interested in sharing the peace that they've experienced, the joy that they've experienced with family, with friends and others. So it can be a life transformational experience, and it can be definitely a transformational experience, but life continues to be able to fulfill all responsibilities, but with a higher consciousness.
Like Ingrid said, once the gate is open, it doesn't ever close after you've had an experience like that. Ingrid, perhaps you could share with us how it affected you, this experience, because you said you were quite angry coming back into the body, and what happened for you was that very often when you were going to sleep, you would then have out-of-body experiences that kept you back in that frame of feeling the light. It must have been a very confusing and difficult time.
Yeah, and it was when I came back from my near-death experience and I look at my parents, it was the sense that these are not just my biological parents. I had experienced that sense of oneness with God, and now like, these are not just my parents, these are my equal. I felt them as my equal, so I became very rebellious because I was like, why do I have to listen to these people? And I was not attached to them, and I look at my body and I'm like, this is not who I am. And I would say, I am not this child. So I never felt like a child again. And I would look at other children And I could not really relate because I would look at them like, what is happening to these people? They don't know anything. So I try with the adults. I'm like, they don't know anything either. I felt so alone. I felt so isolated. It was like, I am an alien. So I would ask God, why did you send me with no manual? So it was very hard. But then what helped me in my path was I started to have these out-of-body experiences. And I would go back to the light. Otherwise, I would have felt completely alone. And then I would just be embraced again. Oh. And then in these journeys is when in one of the journeys, I started to see I was surrounded by star-like figures.
Starlight.
Star-like. Mm-hmm. And they were shining in all different colors. And then in another journey, one of these star-like figures that was shining in gold shaped itself into a human form. Cannot show me. We're the same. And I'm like, and it touched me. And I said, oh, you are a being of light. And then in that experience, I woke up. But now I started to feel I'm not alone. I'm not alone. But now I wanted to sleep all the time. So I could not be the child that is left forever, of course. So my parents hired a new nanny. Of course, they fired that one. And then there was the new one, but I was sleeping, and she's like, oh, I don't have to take care of that child. So, but of course, I could not be sleeping, so something had to be in balance. And one day, taking a shower, I'm just relaxing in the shower when a beam of light that was shining in blue, intense blue light, appeared in the bathroom. I'm like, oh, now the beams of light are here. And I started to see them everywhere. And it's when I started to have the sense of home. Like, oh, now home is here, now they are here. And this brought me to a teaching that I got to understand a lot better later in my life. But it was that teaching that home was not a place, was a state of being. And then at the beginning, it was also that sense of when I started to feel them here, I wanted now to play with my sisters, and up to this point I refused to eat. I didn't want to even be touched. I was in a state of like really scary for a parents and a person. And then now I am feeling a lot better, but I was still throwing tantrums because I did not identify with my persona and my name. And every time they will call me Ingrid, I'll be like, ah, that's not my name. And then one night they were calling me for dinner, and the maid came like, Ingrid, we're calling you for dinner. And I said, don't call me like that, that's not my name. And when she said, then what is your name? And I say, I do not need one. So that night was they sent me to bed, of course, like this child. And then I was so sad, like angry, crying. And it's when for the first time I hear voice. Before I was seeing, I could sense and I could smell, like just like flowers. And this was the first time that I heard. And the voice, it was this loving, compassionate, very calm voice. And he said, it's going to take time for them to understand that names are not needed in the realm of the light. Of course, later I understood that names are needed for our human experience, that they are beautiful, they carry frequency, all that. But it's realizing labels are not needed in the realm of the light. Mm-hmm. So that all this helped me with my process of being able to adapt and feel better. And they also said to me that people will be put in my path to help me and guide me, and that was later my mom and my grandmother.
So your grandmother became quite an important person in your life. She taught you to meditate at the age of 8. She introduced you to the Bhagavad Gita, which you started reading at the age of 9, which is kind of crazy considering you're in Colombia. And then you started studying world religions and seeing the common themes. So your inquiring mind really kicked in. And you also suddenly could read and write, which you couldn't before. And you were a genius at mathematics, which, you know, people were like, how is this possible? So quite extraordinary things happened. Sister Jayanti, this part of the experience of the beings of light, I wonder if I can just lean on your own personal experience again here, because I know that, you know, when I first knew you, you had this ability to kind of go into a state where you could see that dimension of light, you could see beings of light, you could hear messages which you were able to relate to others. Can you give us a handle on the spiritual understanding of what this dimension of light is and who these beings of light are?
Think about 3 different dimensions. So here you've got the physical dimension, this planet, and we've spoken about that place of silence, the place of light, the home. And then in between there's what we would describe as the subtle region, and some may call it the astral plane. And here is the world of sound and movement. There it's a place, no sound, no movement, nothing. And this subtle region is a place where there's movement but no sound. But yet you can understand each other because you're communicating through the power of thought. And so there is a place which is the subtle region. And it's not a place in a geographical way, but it's a different dimension. And you can experience it in meditation or through your fortune, your destiny, that you were able to experience it without meditation also. But there is this space where you can experience beings of light, angelic beings, and communicate with them. And you know how when children speak about these things, especially in the West, parents will say, oh, you've been daydreaming, forget it. And maybe even tell them, you mustn't talk like that anymore. People will think you're crazy. And so they'll shut them up. And so then the child learns not to speak about these things anymore. It'll mean reactions. But many children have these experiences. And in India, a child is encouraged to talk about those experiences. And sometimes children will speak about experiences of past lives also, but also dimension of silence or the dimension of the angels, the divine beings. So we've gone into very interesting territory. But all of these things are a reality. This is a reality on one level, but in fact, as a physicist, you'll tell me, well, this is just energy. It's not the real thing that it seems to be. And so reality also has so many different dimensions. So in the physical world, I'll say this is real. And in the spiritual dimension, I'll say the soul is real. And that experience of the soul being real is that if you think about, well, where are my feelings? My feelings are not here. And even though my heart goes pumping fast sometimes, it's a machine, it's a pumping machine. The heart is actually here. And so my feelings, my memories, my personality, everything that I am is actually not here, it's all in here. And that is reality. You can't see sound waves, but you can hear them. You can't see electricity, but you know for sure it's real. And so today, as people begin to explore consciousness and see what that really is, they're beginning to understand that reality has many different layers, and you can explore a reality just simply through consciousness, but you can't with machines or devices.
We often talk about the power of science versus the power of silence, you know, both these incredibly intense and important experiences. And I wonder, Ingrid, you know, having had this profound experience of the oneness and the light and this bliss of being in the company of the divine, how you went from that into saying, right, I'm going to go and train as a scientist and get very involved in the material world. And I wonder how that was for you and how this experience helped or hindered in your professional work as a NASA scientist and, you know, oceanographer.
Oh, this experience just changed everything in my life. So people ask me like, oh, but you're a scientist. How is about this thing with spirituality? And I said, oh, because I was a spiritual before being a scientist, of course. So for me, I think that the path of science have different reasons, but I think one of those was the needed at the beginning from grounding. But also I just had it clear since I was little one. I was 4 years old, and when my parents brought me to see the ocean, I had this love for the water. And you mentioned it, the water, and when people say, how could you pick marine science if you drown? I said, because drowning brought me to see the light. And the water became this element that was so important to me. And not just that, but I now wanted to know the depthness of everything. So it was in that sense that, I wanted to go deep. And when my parents brought me to see the ocean also, I was born in the mountains. I was 4 years old, and when I saw the ocean, I was completely mesmerized. And then I looked at the ocean and say, I turned to my mom, someday I'm going to know what is under that blanket. And when I was 5, I told my dad, I'm going to become a marine scientist. And he's like, where is this coming from? But he said, like, that's what you want to be, that's what you would do. So it was already that sense of being guided to pick this path. And then, although I went into my path of spirituality and very in depth, once I went to college, I knew this is what I'm going to do. And then I think science brought me the possibility to ground and pick a career where I got busy, and I needed that grounding. There was a moment in my life when the beings of light, I am 19, they asked me if I wanted to be a teacher, to serve, to pick this path of serving at that moment. And I said, no, I don't want to teach anything. I just didn't feel ready. And for a long time, I felt that I didn't belong. And for a long time now, I had 3 more sisters, the parties, going out, all this stuff, and I just always felt I don't belong. So when I went to college, it was the sense, I want to be like everyone else. So it's when I said to the beings of light, what about I just do this other thing? And then, of course, the light is always here for us. So, like I said, the door is closed, but the door is open, but then I decided, okay, I close. For now, let me just, and then we can find very easy the way to lower our vibrational frequency by becoming really stressed, very busy, very focused in other things. But still, those principles that I grew up with and that connection with God I carried forever. So I did all the work I did in science, always directed to create consciousness and create consciousness for nature. And I became an expert in climate change, and I worked with a big project with mangroves and taught the people to go back and feel that they were nature too. And it was always the sense of how can I bring people to feel that presence of the light one way or another. So I guess, in one way I was already doing the work, just in a different way. Yeah.
If I can just fast forward you a little bit, because you had 20 years, more or less, when you didn't really have this feeling of communication with the beings of light. And you'd been in this war situation, you'd witnessed horrendous atrocities. You were then in the USA, you got married, 3 days later your husband leaves for 7 months. You have a child who you're raising on your own. The child is ill. You then have a heart condition. You've got no friends. You're struggling with money. And you reach a really low point. So low, in fact, that you briefly contemplated, what's the point in living? I'm gonna go back to the light. Really rock bottom. Mm-hmm. How did that experience turn itself around for you to become the person that you are now? And I ask this question because, there are a lot of people in situations in their life where they're feeling desperate and feeling, what is the point? Yeah, there's just, look at the world situation, look at my situation, there's no hope, there's no point. How did you turn it around?
I think at that point of my life shook me so hard. It's the part in life when you just, like, all the sufferings, all the challenges come together and it's just shaking your ground. And at that moment, I just felt the sense of, I only have two choices, or to join the light or do something about it. And then that night that I really felt that impulse to leave, couple of things happened. One, it was the sense of give yourself one more day. The other one was I could never see my mom suffering if I would take my life. I could not be responsible for her suffering. It was something I just could not bear to do. And then at that moment I went into prayer. And my prayer wasn't, God, change this, change that. My prayer was, God, help me see because I have become blinded. God, help me see because I cannot see. And I knew it was that sense that with so many, the busyness of life, although I became very successful in my career and all that, it was that sense that I had become separated. And that I have lost my sense of my authentic self, and that was what made me very depressed. And then at this moment, next day, the first thing I felt was that call of look for help. And it was like, the first thing it was, I went to look for the help of a psychologist. It's when I also later understood, look, we're here each other to give the hand to each other. And then I went to look in the computer for a psychologist in my area, and I saw a good feedback of this one. I wrote the name. That very day I went to the cafeteria. I was still at NASA, and then someone that very day mentioned that her daughter was going to this psychologist, and it was the same one I have written on the paper. And then I met that very day another person that gave me the same name of the same doctor for other reasons. And I'm like, okay, I got it. This is a synchronicity. And then I decided to go to this doctor. And then, he was a very spiritual person indeed. And then I started to share with him. And then he told me to write a list of sufferings. I'm like, okay. He said writing was very cathartic. I started to write the list. I brought the list to him and we read it. And he said, in my 37 years of career, I have never met anyone that has suffered this much and is mentally stable. And I was like, whoa. So at that moment, my heart was broken, and I said, I'm crying, and I said, why me? And it's when he gave me the words that I said, turn on the light back. He said, why not? And then I've been talking to him already for like a year, and he wasn't taking notes, but he started to say, look, thanks to this you have done this, and thanks to this that, and thanks to this, and he started to show me that there was purpose behind everything. And I started to connect all the knots. I'm like, oh, yes. And then one other thing is realizing the power of listening. He really listened. And then it was the sense of feeling safe with this person. Then at that moment, 3 miracles happened. The first miracle was the realization when I was able to tie all the notes and find purpose behind everything, is that I realized nothing ever happened to me. It happened for me. So I could be sitting in that chair at that moment with that clarity, that realization, and that sense of gratitude. Then the second miracle was the realization that I was my only truth, or my only reality at that moment. I'm sitting in front of this doctor, and this is the only thing that is truly happening. The rest is all in my head. And I can do with what is in my head anything I want. So it was a sense of empowerment. Like, oh, it's all here. And the third miracle was the sense of learning what true forgiveness was. And it was realizing, since nothing is happening to me but for me, then there's nothing to forgive. Or I could say two things: there was nothing to forgive, or everything was forgiven. And that's what brought me back to feeling that the presence and just being again connected with the Father. Yeah.
And from then on you have remained very much connected, and
yes.
And the feeling for service and being an instrument for bringing that light into the world has grown stronger and stronger for you. Sister Jayanti, what do you feel was happening in that moment when Ingrid was talking about her realization that it was actually just in her mind, it was the mind that had taken control? And in a way she's describing a sense of detachment, where you can become the observer of yourself and see what's going on. I'm interested how these meditation experiences can help us in very practical ways when we're feeling down and feeling low, how they can put us back together again. How does that work?
If I think about the reality of what's going on in the mind, there is patterns of behavior that are stored within the soul, and in Hindi we call them sanskaras. So out of these sanskaras come my thoughts, and if I'm feeling at that moment that I'm worthless, nobody's caring about me, I don't care about anyone, it's part of that pattern in which I don't value myself and I don't have self-esteem. And this is a very current problem. Many have superiority complexes, but I think many more have actually very inferior complexes in which they don't value themselves and don't respect themselves. But of course that also then means that they don't value and respect any other person. And if you think about the wars that are going on currently, what is the value of life? It's as if that's been totally set aside for property, for places, for position. And so meditation changes this. And in a very conscious way, if I begin to think of myself as a child of the divine, and every tradition has spoken about how we have been created in the image of the Creator. We are an image of the Creator. So the qualities of the divine are reflected in every human being. And if I'm hearing spiritual teachings and I start reflecting on them and experimenting with them, and something sparks within me, and I say that, yes, I may have been one of those divine beings, but today I'm not. But with the help from above, through meditation, that power, I can be that once again. And so through the change of rhythm within my own mind, my change of perception and attitude, all of that changes, and I'm able to now come to the awareness of my own inner value and the values, the qualities that I have within myself, which every human soul has. There's nobody who doesn't have good qualities, but we've forgotten. And so meditation reminds me of that goodness that lies within. And then in this awareness of being a child of the divine, and I hold myself in that consciousness, my self-esteem rises, the lack finishes, and I have dignity. And I work and live with respect and dignity. And I know that I'm connected to the whole human family. They also are part of the creation of the divine. And so my family is not just the nuclear family, but my family is a bigger family. In fact, it's the world. And so consciousness changes completely when I come back to this understanding that there is goodness within, and I carry the qualities of the divine. And so, but it means that I have to keep practicing this. You know, like when you light a little candle, immediately there's light. But tomorrow you have to reignite it again. And so this light comes on and the door never completely shuts, but you can forget. And so next day, again, if I spend a few minutes in silence, exploring who I am and what's going on inside, that feeling again emerges of valuing the self and loving the self so that I can love others too.
It is a strange thing because we know this. We know the true nature of ourselves, and yet we forget. And in that state of forgetting, we can convince ourselves that the opposite is real. It's almost like these games that we play with ourselves. And I know that you had that experience of, we just forget, but we never truly forget.
Yeah, I just say it's like drinking the orange juice. I said, I like to give the analogy, like imagine you know everything about oranges and orange juice, the chemistry, the biology, the physiology, but if you never drink the juice, you don't know it. And okay, you leave it, but the moment you drink the juice, now you truly know it. And I can ask you, even if you don't drink the juice for 30 years, I can ask you, oh, you have ever had orange juice? And like, yes. So once you bring yourself to know it, it never goes away. Yes.
And the same is true of experiencing that unity with God.
Never.
And you could say that human suffering comes about because of the separation with the divine. And the soul is actually yearning for that bliss, for that union and that unity. And there's nothing you need beyond that. That is all the soul actually needs. You're nodding your head there, Sister Jayanti. Would you agree with that?
Totally. But I want to go back to your earlier point. Although we know, we forget. And the reason why we forget is that the soul has been occupying this body for so long. And for those of us who believe in previous births and so on, it's not just that I've occupied this body for this period of time, but there are other bodies that I'd occupied, but it was always restricted to this human form. And so I began to think that this is who I am, rather than this. And so today also, although I know that, the habit of being in the physical consciousness of matter is so deeply entrenched that it pulls me to itself again and again. And so I need to remind myself again and again.
It's like the analogy of we're not the Matchbox, we're this whole great big stadium, and yet we get comfortable in our little box, and we think that that's all we are. I'm keeping a little eye on time here, actually. We're so absorbed in conversation, I'm in danger of getting carried away. It would be lovely to have an experience of what it is that we've been talking about. Before we go into our meditation, Ingrid, share with us the story when you were asked if you could have 3 wishes, what would you wish? And what your answer was.
Yes. The beings of light can be kind of funny sometimes. They're very joyful, so they come one day, 3 in the morning. If the genie in the bottle will come and ask you for 3 wishes, what would you ask? And at the beginning, I said, because it was 3 in the morning, I just woke up. What came in my mind at that moment was like, wisdom, compassion, and courage. Because I thought, if you have wisdom, whoa, you know where to go, how to do, when to do it, it's like, of course, wisdom. Then I thought, after that, compassion, of course, compassion is love in action. You will be able to now be balanced with that wisdom. And courage, because you need a lot of courage to keep going on this path. And then that's what I was holding for years. And sometimes we don't know of where we are in our spiritual path or our process of waking up. We don't know until something offers some contrast. And years later, one night I am sleeping again, and out of the blue, the beings of light, if the genie in the bottle will appear again, what 3 wishes? What are your 3 wishes? And I'm like, whoa. At that moment, something different has happened. I do not have 3 wishes. And so it took a minute. I'm like, there's not 3 wishes. And then something came. So it's when I knew that something different was in me, that I already have had this change. And then at that moment, the only thing that came to mind was 1 wish. And was not even for me, it was for all of us. And the wish was, I wish that we will all realize the abundance that we are. So if all of us will realize how abundant we are, war will end. Because I would not want anything from anybody if I have everything in me. And at that moment is when I experienced how giving and receiving became one. And then I had that again, that deep communion with the Father. Because it's when I experienced, of course, the Father doesn't want anything. Because He's the ultimate giver. And it's like, what if we can get there too? How can we just be that ultimate giver? Yes, and with that, something came too, like later on when I said the words, I serve. And I was thinking, I serve God. And that clarity came, and He says, you serve no one. You are service itself. Yeah.
So beautiful. I'm going to put you on the spot, Sister Jayanti. It's a day for people to give gifts to you, but what 3 wishes would you have if the genie came out of the bottle?
I would want every person to be happy, every person to be healthy, and every person to have enough for their needs. And this is a promise that Brahma Baba made way back at that time when I had said I want to surrender. He'd asked me, is it possible for this to happen? And I didn't have an answer. I was 19 and he was 92. And so I didn't have an answer, but he said, yes, it's possible. So I hold that vision and I believe that it will be possible.
it was two angels joining us. So beautiful. So much to think about. Let's just take a moment to bring our time together to a close and just try and put ourselves into that experience that you've been hearing so much about this evening, this experience of love, the experience of being in the light. And I'd like to invite both Sister Ingrid and Sister Jayanti to share with us what they're feeling in their meditation. If we start with you, Ingrid, and then Sister Jayanti, if you could finish us, that would be beautiful. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Let's bring ourselves to that place of silence, where we're able to listen the voice of our Father. Let's go to that place of opening of the heart, where we are able to feel the embrace, the love, the joy, the peace, that place where we remember that we are children and that we are playing in the playground of life. This place where we never feel alone, where we are embraced and able to embrace each other, where our heart is filled with peace and joy and understanding and clarity. Let's dance and allow the Father to dance with us. Remember the Father, and remember that we are never, ever alone.
Om Shanti. In this awareness of I, the child of the Divine, connected with my parent, the Supreme Mother and Father, the being of light, from the ocean of love and the ocean of peace, I find myself surrounded by these qualities. And as I absorb this love and peace within myself, I realize that there are so many others out there who could also be searching for their Father and wanting to experience God's love and peace. And with this thought comes the awareness that, in fact, I just simply have to love the divine and remember the divine, and those vibrations of divine love and peace emanates from the cereal just this moment here, emanates from the source, and reaches out and touches not only me, but it touches my human family. And each soul can experience this love and peace. But even beyond, God's light, God's peace touches all forms of life. And beyond, God's light touches the whole of nature, all the elements of matter. And the whole planet is surrounded by light and love and peace. And now I come back to the awareness of the physical dimension. But I keep that connection with the source, with the divine, so that love and light stay with me and help me in all that I do in the physical world. Om Shanti.
Thank you both so much. Thank you for sharing so deeply. Thank you for sharing so much from your heart. I think we have all felt the presence of the very special light that we each are. And it feels so important at this time that we awaken to the reality that all is well, all is very well. Thank you both so much. I feel almost like they sometimes say if you've been affected by any of the issues raised in this program, if you have really been touched and you would like to find out more about what we've been talking about this evening, then I can invite you to have a look at the website for this house, where you will find details of other events in-house, other events online. We have a number of different languages that we offer events in. There's a catch-up where you can see past events, and there is a meditation meditation course that starts at the beginning of each month, Raj Yoga meditation course, and details of that and all the other events are on globalcooperationhouse.org. And you can also subscribe there to the mailing list, and you'll be sent details of weekly and monthly events, and you can subscribe there from the website as well. So at this point, I'm going to say goodbye to our online friends. We're going to be distributing a few gifts here in the house, which unfortunately I'm not able to teleport through time and space to you, but I can say thank you very much indeed to everyone online for joining us and adding your energy to what we in the room here can really feel, and I hope you can feel it where you are at home as well. We look forward to you joining us again one day very soon, but until that time, take good care. Om Shanti and good night.